It was a sunny afternoon in the small town of Harborville. Jake sat on his porch, looking at the calm lake in the distance. Every year, the town hosted a big boat race. The best boats competed, and the winner always became a local hero. Jake dreamed of joining the race this year, but there was a big problem. He didn't own a boat. Jake thought about asking for help, but his family didn't have extra money. Buying a boat was too expensive. "Maybe I don't need to buy one," Jake whispered to himself. "What if I build my own boat?" The idea made him excited, but also nervous. He had never built anything so big before. However, Jake decided to try. "I can do this," he thought. He imagined himself crossing the finish line, smiling while the crowd cheered. When Jake shared his plan with others, they laughed. "A homemade boat? That's impossible," one man said. Another added, "You'll just embarrass yourself." Their words hurt Jake, but he refused to give up. The next day, Jake walked around the neighborhood, looking for old wood and materials. He collected scraps from construction sites and asked neighbors for anything they didn't need. Some people gave him nails, paint, and even a broken paddle. By the end of the week, Jake had a small pile of supplies. It wasn't much, but it was enough to start. Standing in his backyard, he looked at the materials and smiled. "This is the beginning of my dream," he said, holding a hammer in his hand. Jake woke up early the next day, ready to start building. The backyard was quiet, except for the sound of birds singing. He placed the wooden planks on the ground and began measuring them carefully. "If this boat isn't strong, it won't survive the lake," he thought. At first, Jake struggled with the tools. The saw was heavy, and the hammer kept slipping from his hand. He accidentally hit his thumb once, making him shout, "Ouch!" But he didn't stop. Every time something went wrong, he reminded himself, "I can do this." The work was slow, but Jake started to see progress. He cut the wood into the right shapes and used nails to hold the pieces together. The boat was small and simple, but it began to look like something that could float. After hours of hard work, he wiped the sweat from his forehead and stepped back to admire his progress. "It's not perfect," he said, "but it's mine." While Jake worked, some neighbors stopped by to watch. Most of them just shook their heads. "This will never work," one woman said, laughing. Jake pretended not to hear, but deep inside it hurt. Still, he focused on his dream and kept going. On the third day, his friend Tom came to visit. Tom was one of the few people who believed in Jake. "Wow, it's really starting to look like a boat," Tom said with a big smile. "Do you need help?" Jake hesitated at first, but then nodded. "Sure, 2 hands are better than 1. Together, they worked faster. Tom held the wood steady while Jake hammered the nails. They painted the boat with leftover blue paint from Tom's garage. By the end of the week, the boat was finished. It was small, rough, and a little crooked, but Jake loved it. "I can't believe we did it," Jake said, touching the boat's side. Tom smiled and replied, "Now you're ready for the water." Jake felt proud but also nervous. What if it sinks? He wondered. But he pushed the thought away. "I'll find out soon enough," he said, looking toward the lake. The day had finally come to test the boat. Jake woke up feeling a mix of excitement and fear. He tied the boat to a small cart and pulled it all the way to the lake. As he walked through the town, people stared and whispered, Some laughed, but Jake kept his eyes forward. When he reached the lake, the water was calm and sparkling under the sun. Jake took a deep breath and said to himself, "It's now or never." He untied the boat and carefully pushed it into the water. For a moment, it floated perfectly. Jake smiled with relief. "It works," he thought, but the joy didn't last long. As soon as Jake stepped into the boat, it wobbled. He froze, trying to keep his balance. "Stay calm," he whispered. Slowly, he sat down, hoping the boat would hold. At first, everything seemed fine. The boat moved gently with the water. Jake picked up the paddle and tried to row. But as soon as he leaned forward, the boat tilted dangerously to one side. Water started spilling in. "Oh no!" Jake shouted. He tried to balance the boat, but it was no use. Within seconds, he was in the water. The people watching from the shore burst into laughter. Jake swam back to the shore, dragging the boat behind him. His clothes were soaked, and his face burned with embarrassment. "I knew it wouldn't work," someone shouted. Jake sat on the grass, looking at the boat. For a moment, he felt like giving up. Maybe they're right, he thought. Maybe this was a stupid idea. Then he heard a voice. It was Tom running toward him. "Are you okay?" he asked, pulling Jake to his feet. "It's not the end, you know. Every inventor has failures." Jake looked at his friend and then back at the boat. He smiled weakly. "You're right. I'll fix it." This was just the first try. The morning of the race arrived, and Harborville buzzed with excitement. Families gathered near the lake, setting up picnic blankets and cheering as competitors prepared their boats. Jake woke up early, his heart pounding with both nervousness and excitement. He had worked every day to fix the issues with his boat, reinforcing the wood and making it more stable. Now it was as ready as it could be. Jake and Tom wheeled the boat to the starting area, where a long row of colorful boats waited. Most of them were sleek and professionally built. Jake's boat stood out. It was small and rough, with patches of blue paint peeling off. Jake overheard someone say, "That thing won't last 5 minutes." Tom patted him on the back. "Don't listen to them," he said. "Remember why you're here." Jake nodded and took a deep breath. "I'm here to prove to myself that I can do it." As the race announcer explained the rules, Jake looked at the water. It was calm, but he knew the race wouldn't be easy. The competitors had to row across the lake, around a buoy, and back to the starting point. Jake felt his hands shake as he climbed into his boat and grabbed the paddle. "On your marks? Get set, go!" shouted the announcer. A loud horn blasted, and the race began. The other boats shot forward, their paddlers moving quickly and in perfect rhythm. Jake started paddling, but his boat was much slower. He struggled to keep up, his arms already aching after just a few strokes. People on the shore cheered for the faster boats, but Jake focused on his own goal, finishing the race. Halfway through, Jake heard a voice from a nearby boat. It was Tom, who had entered the race too. "Keep going, Jake. You're doing great," he shouted. Jake smiled and felt a new burst of energy. He wasn't racing to win. He was racing to prove something to himself. As Jake approached the buoy, his boat wobbled slightly but stayed steady. He managed to turn it around without tipping over. Behind him, he could hear the crowd starting to notice his effort. "He's still in it," someone yelled. Jake paddled with all his strength as he made his way back across the lake. His arms ached and sweat dripped down his face, but he kept going. The faster boats were already far ahead, and it seemed impossible to catch up. Still, he told himself, I'm not here to win. I'm here to finish. The water grew choppier as the wind picked up. Jake's small boat rocked from side to side, making it harder to paddle straight. Stay calm, he whispered. He adjusted his grip on the paddle and focused on keeping the boat steady. Slowly but surely, he gained more control. As Jake rowed, he noticed another boat stuck near the buoy. A boy about his age was struggling to untangle a rope caught on his paddle. It was Tom. Need help? Jake called out. Tom looked up, surprised. I can't move, he shouted. Jake carefully turned his boat toward Tom's. He reached out with his paddle and helped push the rope free. Thanks, Jake, Tom said, grinning. You didn't have to stop. Jake smiled back. We're in this together, right? With Tom back in the race, Jake felt a new sense of purpose. He might not have been the fastest, but he could still make a difference. The two paddled side by side for a while, encouraging each other to keep going. We've got this, Tom said, and Jake nodded. As they got closer to the shore, the cheering from the crowd grew louder. Jake could see the other competitors already finishing, but he didn't feel discouraged. Instead, he focused on the rhythm of his paddling and the steady movement of his boat. Almost there, Jake thought, but then a sudden wave hit his boat. It tilted dangerously, and Jake froze for a moment, afraid it might capsize. Come on, Jake, you've got this, Tom shouted from a few feet away. Jake gritted his teeth and steadied the boat, carefully adjusting his movements. The crowd noticed his struggle and began to cheer even louder. Go, Jake, you can do it, voices shouted from the shore. Hearing their support gave him the final push he needed. With all his remaining strength, Jake paddled forward, his heart pounding as the finish line came into view. When Jake finally crossed the line, the crowd erupted into applause. He was the last to finish, but the cheers were louder than ever. Tom was waiting for him on the shore, smiling proudly. You did it, Jake, he said, helping him out of the boat. Jake looked around at the smiling faces and felt a wave of pride. He hadn't won the race, but he had achieved something even more important. He had proven to himself that he could do it no matter how hard it seemed. Thanks, Tom, Jake said, shaking his hand. I couldn't have done it without you. As the crowd gathered around to congratulate him, Jake realized that his small, rough boat had done something amazing. It wasn't about being perfect or the fastest. It was about believing in himself and never giving up. Jake stepped out of his boat, his legs shaky from the effort. The crowd surrounded him, clapping and cheering. He looked down at his small, rough boat and couldn't help but smile. It wasn't the fastest or the prettiest, but it had carried him across the finish line. For Jake, that was the real victory. Tom was the first to approach him, grinning from ear to ear. You were amazing out there, Jake, he said, patting his shoulder. Jake laughed, still catching his breath. I didn't think I'd make it, he admitted. There were so many moments when I thought I'd fail. But you didn't, Tom said firmly. You kept going, and that's what matters. As Jake looked around, he noticed some of the other competitors coming over. A tall man with a shiny, professional-looking boat shook Jake's hand. That was impressive, the man said. You didn't let anything stop you. Jake felt a surge of pride. People who had doubted him before were now congratulating him. Even the woman who had laughed at his boat earlier came up to him. I didn't think it would float, she admitted with a chuckle. But you proved me wrong. Great job, Jake. The announcer approached the group, holding a small trophy. This isn't for first place, he said with a smile. But every year we give a special award to the racer who shows the most determination and heart. This year it goes to Jake. The crowd cheered as Jake accepted the trophy. It wasn't as big or shiny as the one for the winner, but to Jake it meant everything. He held it up high, feeling a mix of pride and gratitude. Later that evening, as Jake and Tom sat by the lake, watching the sunset, Jake reflected on the day. I didn't win the race, he said, but I feel like I won something bigger. I learned that it's okay to fail, as long as you keep trying. Tom nodded. And next year, your boat will be even better. Jake smiled, already imagining the possibilities. Next year, he said, I'll be back, stronger and ready. The sun was setting, painting the sky with shades of orange and pink. Jake sat by the lake, holding his small trophy in his hands. He turned it over, reading the engraved words, for determination and heart. It wasn't the first place trophy, but to him it meant more than winning ever could. Tom sat beside him, skipping small stones across the water. You know, he said, breaking the silence, a lot of people wouldn't have done what you did today. They would have given up after the first try. Jake smiled, thinking about his journey. There were so many times I wanted to quit, he admitted. When the boat didn't work, when people laughed at me, even during the race. But every time I told myself to just keep going, Tom nodded. And look where that got you. You didn't just finish the race, you inspired people. Jake looked back at the crowd, now packing up their blankets and heading home. He thought about the strangers who had cheered for him, the competitors who had shaken his hand, and the announcer who had given him the special trophy. It wasn't about being the fastest or the strongest. It was about proving to himself that he could do it. This isn't the end, Jake said, his voice filled with determination. This was just the beginning. I've learned so much, and next time I'll be ready. Tom grinned. You're already planning for next year. Jake laughed. Of course. I want to build a better boat, stronger, faster, and maybe even win. The two friends sat quietly for a moment, watching the water ripple in the evening breeze. Jake felt a deep sense of peace and accomplishment. He had faced his fears, overcome challenges, and learned one of the most important lessons of his life. Success isn't about perfection. It's about perseverance. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Jake stood up, holding the trophy tightly. Next year, he said with a smile, I'll be back,